Hey, what's up, guys? Erik, Woerkom here with Muley Freak. I'm here on the SCHEELS Outdoor podcast where we're going to be talking about Western mule deer hunting, some tips, some tricks, some tactics, and also drawing some parallels and some comparisons between mule deer hunting and whitetail hunting.
Welcome to the SCHEELS Outdoors podcast, your source for information on hunting, fishing, and all of your outdoor passions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCHEELS Outdoors podcast. My name is Mike Anderson, and today we're going to be talking about Western hunting and in specific, mule deer hunting. So mule deer has quickly crept up to the top of the list of my personal favorites for animal to chase. And we've got a guest with us today who shares that exact same passion. His name is Erik Van Woerkom of Muley Freak. And we're going to be talking mule deer strategy, tips, tactics, get ourselves ready for the season. Erik, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how Muley Freak got started?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on here and talk a little bit about one of my number one passions, and that is mule deer hunting. But yeah, so I grew up on a dairy, a Jersey dairy here in northern Utah. And, farming was obviously a big deal for us out west, along with athletics. And the next thing was hunting. And I look forward every fall to getting up in the woods and hunting mule deer. And so that was my number one passion. I going back through scrapbooks and looking at my grandpa's photos of all those bucks piled in the trucks or hanging from the rafters of the farm. And I just developed this passion bred inside of me for mule deer hunting. So fast forward, a couple decades, I saw an opportunity on Facebook with this whole social media craze, and I wanted to create a brand around my passion that is mule deer hunting. And we launched a couple giveaways, and all of a sudden, Muley Freak was born. So it was that crazy and that fast, and all of a sudden we're like, man, what do we do? So we developed a little bit of a brand and did some T-shirts and hats, and eventually developed some specialty products, and now here we are. So
yeah, it's crazy how things can go from just having a passion and wanting to share that to, like using social media to find like-minded people and just starting a fire from there.
Yeah, it is pretty remarkable if you think about pre-social media and how we communicated with folks to now that you work for SCHEELS and I'm a Muley Freak and we're discussing something over a computer that we both love. It's crazy how technology has driven the outdoor and the hunting industry specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just absolutely insane. So what is it about the mule deer that just like drives you crazy and gets you pumped?
Man, I think for me, in my mind, the mule deer is the icon of the West. And, back into the 1950s where habitat was thriving, there was just giant mule deer everywhere out here. It seems like, our grandparents and great uncles were just killing these slammer bucks with their 30-30s, right? I mean, and then as, some of the habitat started to disappear as we built houses along the Wasatch Front here. I'm familiar with the Sandy store, that whole corridor right there is kind of the wintering ground. So we saw the mule deer start to struggle. And I think with the growth of the population, mule deer declined, which made opportunities rare. And as you know, if something becomes a scarcity, it becomes more popular. And so, I think mule deer kind of picked up from there. But back to your question, I just think that a mule deer and a big mature mule deer is, in my opinion, is one of the hardest trophies to come by when it comes to Western big game hunting, because they're so smart, they're so cunning, and a lot of times they don't come out of the woodworks until the rut. And so I think, bagging a big mule deer is just the top, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I never really started hunting mule deer until probably 5 years ago. So I'd been, I grew up in central Minnesota, like whitetail whitetail mecca, basically. Like that's what you hunt around there. So like I grew up hunting whitetail and then moved to North Dakota, moved to Fargo, and just right across the border. It's not really mule deer country there, but I was in I'm now in a state that has a good mule deer population. So I'm like, okay, I'll start applying for tags. Like rifle, it takes 5 to 8 years to draw one. So I was applying with my wife, and she drew a tag first. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, it gave me a reason to like go out there with my bow and really get into it and kind of, understand how to hunt them and where they're at and stuff like that. And it just immediately, I absolutely loved it. Just the thought of like going to new terrain, like some breaky stuff, and spot and stalk. I love spot and stalk now. It's super fun. Like growing up sitting in a tree and waiting, like now I can go and I can chase these animals. I can make my own luck. They're big and they're smart, different mentality. It's so fun chasing these animals.
You hit the nail on the head with kind of the versatility thing, like going out and making your own luck. What's really unique about mule deer is you'll find them in the cropland, in the bottoms, in these coulees, all the way up to 12,500 feet at the high country of Wyoming. And hunting them in those different terrains is just so exhilarating, especially when you're hunting high country mule deer. And actually harvesting one of those deer is something to really be proud of, because it is that tough. It is next level when you're up into that kind of country. And so for an adventure guy or a backpack hunter, it's just something we all dream about out west. And I think growing up too, the whitetail shows were so prevalent, right? You saw there was the Lee and Tiffany's, there was the Michael Waddell's, and hunting whitetail and tree stand, which is super cool, but you just didn't see those mule deer shows until recent years, And even then, you still don't see a lot of high country TV shows. So the mule deer is just special because, number one, they're so hard to go after. They're hard to obtain in tags a lot of times, and they just live in such different types of terrain, and from the low badlands to the high country. So they're pretty unique.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And it's just being able to film that adds a whole new level of difficulty too, because if you're trying to film a whitetail show, it's not easy by any means, but like you can really plan stuff out a lot more. You're like, okay, well, I know I'm going to have this tree and that tree for my camera person, and we're going to have this angle, and then, kind of make it happen from there. But like with mule deer, like, you have no idea where you're going to be set up, what the situation's going to be. Maybe it's good for video, maybe it's not, just kind of flying by the seat of your pants.
Oh man, it's tough. And if you get enough time to scout, you've got to make these trips into the backcountry where you've got to commit 3-4 days to try to scout these bucks. And, when you're up in that kind of country on public land, it just makes scouting tough, And then you add the filming aspect, like you just talked about. Good luck finding a cameraman that wants to go on a trip and watch you kill a deer that's that extreme, you know what I mean? So
yeah. And if you find one, make sure to hang on to them.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure to hang on to them, because you just beat yourself up in some of that country, you know what I mean? It's just brutal.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, just the reward though, when it all comes together, it's just cloud nine.
Yeah, just cloud nine. In fact, we have a mule deer country series that we put on YouTube last year, and the first 2 videos are the high country. And Tyler and we ended up killing on day 13 of a high country mule deer hunt. And just the feeling going out of there in the dark with these 2 giant bucks on horses was just amazing. Western hunting, backpacking, you add horses into it. It's just unparalleled.
Mm-hmm, yeah, for those that haven't done it, just start applying for tags. Get somewhere where you can do over the counter. Just get out there and try it. You have to. Yeah,
you have to try it at some point. And it's interesting. I'm sure it's the same with whitetail, but maybe one of the parallels is that hunting mule deer in the early season versus hunting them in the rifle is completely different. Once those mule deer shed their velvet, they go into the timber. Their habits change. They can move basins, they can move different country, and they just become ghosts. That's why, I know coos deer are called the ghosts, but we also call mule deer the ghosts because they literally just disappear once they go hard horned, and they become so hard to pattern, almost unpatternable. They're hard to find, and they're even harder to kill until that rut comes around. So I don't know if it's like that with whitetail. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's very similar. They're like different applications, different areas, but also very similar. Because like, I used to spend a lot of time hunting early season in North Dakota for whitetail. I actually used to be a guide for a couple of years, and you could get the best pattern on bucks early season. Like, okay, they're coming out of this bedding area and they're hitting this green soybean field, and then they're following this tree row or whatever. So you could get a great pattern, and then all of a sudden season comes along, they're shedding their velvet, and then it's like, okay, where did they go? What are they doing now? So yeah, I mean, it definitely similar, and I'm sure a lot of both hunters share the same frustrations in that aspect. But you really kind of got to think about the weather patterns and how things are changing. Because my cousin and I had a successful mule deer hunt last year, and one of the biggest factors to the success was just finding where they're bedding due to that time of year. It was hot. So It's like, okay, you're going to find somewhere that's got good shade, that's going to be in close proximity to water, and, and good cover at the same time.
Yeah. Those are three keys right there, especially early season: water, cover, and bedding. If you can find that, then you should be able to pattern them and kind of make a plan from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the nice thing about hunting early season is like, they're not nearly as educated yet. Like nobody's tried to stalk them or toss an arrow. So if you can get over the hunting them in 80, 90 degree weather aspect of it, you can find some deer that are primed and ready to be stalked.
Yeah, sure. 80, 90 degrees. That seems pretty cool right now. It's like 100, 105 here.
Yeah, I guess I gotta think about the whole country. I mean, like it's hot here, but then you get to like Utah, Nevada, stuff like that. You're hitting triple digits.
Yeah, we're in trouble over here. It's going to be interesting to see what the growth does to the antlers this year, just because it's been so hot. But two other challenges that I see with early season mule deer is, number one, rattlesnakes. You got to watch out for that kind of stuff when you're going on stalks in the prairie. I'm sure you being in North Dakota, you've ran into a few here and there.
Yeah, ran into a couple. Would rather not, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I'd rather not deal with snakes either. And then, just the other challenge is just the heat, really, because it can be absolutely brutal. And if you're hunting a spot where you don't have water, let's say you drew a tag and backpacked in, and you have to drop elevation to get water, that makes the early season mule deer hunting too super tough, because if you've got to drop 2,000 feet in elevation to go down and filter water and haul your water back, that makes it pretty tricky early season too. Wear you out just packing water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like when you're trying to come up with spots to hunt, especially like early season, what's your thought process on areas to target that you think is going to be good for mule deer hunting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I do a lot of e-scouting. Obviously, I use Base Map. I like using the web product because that way I can get in there and identify basins. But essentially, kind of what we talked about, I want to make sure there's good shade. I want to make sure there's open hillsides that they can get the nutrients they need early season. Any type of grasses and that they'll feed on that stuff. And then water. You've got to try to pinpoint where they're going to water. And from there, I'll kind of mark a few spots. I typically try to find 3 or 4 spots that I'd like to try out just on the web map. And then from there, I like to get in there and go check them out. One of the best things you can do, and I know there's 3D products now and things, Google Earth, that you can look up there, but you got to get boots on the ground for mule deer hunting, because it seems like you can find some good country where there's no deer, that you would think there'd be deer. And so you just got to cross those spots off the list. So you don't want to be doing that come season, right? You want to have all those things kind of figured out before the season starts, so you're not burning valuable days of your hunt. So, and then I identify those online: shade, cover, water, and then I get boots on the ground and head in there and see what I can find.
Okay, that makes sense. So when it comes to terms of like types of elevation, do you like to hunt the really breaky stuff? Do you like to hunt sort of transition areas, or what's your thought process there?
So it really just depends on the time of year. I think, transition stuff for maybe mid-year. I think I like to go to the high country for early on. And it just depends on the weather. Like right now we're having weather issues, right? It's extreme drought right now. So, you're going to have a hard time finding good feed. I went up just this last weekend scouting, and everything was still pretty green where I was at. So I was pretty surprised. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next month before the season starts. As mule deer hunting out here, we have season start up as early as mid-August. So we're going to be hunting mule deer with our bow out here in just a few short weeks. So again, it just depends on what the weather's doing on what I'm doing. Transitional areas. If I do find some bucks in the high country, I like to bed animals up before I go in and stalk in on them. A lot of times, if I can, depending on how the terrain is too, there might be spots where you can't get to them bedded up, and you might have to hunt them transitioning from beds to feeding or from beds to water and whatnot. I never really hunted mule deer over a blind, but I'm sure that's possible in some sort of scenarios. But I think the biggest thing with mule deer is being able to be flexible. You might have to adapt to a lot of different hunting styles to get the job done and actually kill.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the game of the name of the game with mule deer, just adaptability. I know, like I referenced a little bit about our hunt last year. Like I had tagged one the first day, and then the next day my hunting partner, we started going after one, and we got to this area where, it was that kind of transition between your really breaky stuff and your ag land. So like it was pretty rolling. It was almost a little flatter than we would like to really put on some good stocks, but we could see a long ways, and we'd see all these animals. Like there was a little creek running through one of these draws, and like a lot of green vegetation, had some sparse cover, and it was a spot where they really wanted to camp out. And, like we're looking at this creek, and we look to the other side, and then there's like just, probably head high brush going around. And we saw all these deer coming out of the woodwork and a couple of nice ones to chase after. And we're like, okay, let's come up with a game plan, figure out how to get to them. Like we have to kind of cross this really flat area, but, maybe it's going to look a little bit different when we actually get down there and find that there's just like enough rise and change in elevation that we can, just get ourselves hidden to get within a couple 100 yards and then come up with a game plan from there. So you just kept working on getting closer and closer and closer. And, by the time that we got right there, then they had kind of fed their way off and jumped a fence. So then they're like basically in bow range looking at us, but we can't do anything about it because they moved to private ground. But, we just figured we'd come up with a game plan from there in the morning, try and get back on them in that same area. And sure enough, almost got to the exact same spot and found them again. And just like before, used the little minuscule change in elevation to kind of keep us hidden and get us to that last few yards to get that shot.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. When you were kind of telling that story, you were like taking me there. I was just getting excited, thinking about like ducking the small of your back hurts so bad because you're trying to stay low as you're creeping through the ag, I'm sure. But like, yeah, I think that's why there's such an appeal to mule deer hunting too, is because you're always thinking, right? It's never easy. I always say that a big bull, we hunt a lot of elk too, but a big bull is out there screaming his head off. You know exactly where he's at with a buck. Mm-hmm. August, September, October, you have no idea where he's at. And the strategy might be different from August, September, and October. All 3 months might require a different form of strategy. So they're always keeping you on your toes, and you're always thinking, and they might bet in country in a scree field, for example. You're not going to be able to stalk. You're not going to be able to go down that steep scree field and be quiet because you're going to be pushing rocks as you go. So that strategy might require, I've got to ambush him somewhere. Okay, what's he doing? I'm just going to watch him today. I'm not going to go after him. I'm going to, exercise patience here and just really, really refrain from going after him and just try to watch and learn what he does. But then with that element, you're like, well, what if someone else gets in there and sees him and blows him out and stalks him. Maybe I should just go in there today because someone else is going to come in tomorrow and blow him out. So there's that element of the public land, and some other guy that finds this buck has just as much right to go after this buck that you might have been scouting all summer. So there's this frustrating part about hunting mule deer too. And not to say, I know there's whitetail hunting on public land, but a lot of times Midwest and East, they set up food plots and grabbed up leases or hunting their own farms. And it's just different with mule deer hunting. It's rugged and relentless. So,
yeah,
when you finally get that mature mule deer, it's just something. It's just, you just did something special.
Oh, 100%. 100%. So when you're doing your mule deer hunting, what weapon do you prefer? Are you more of a archery equipment guy, or do you love the rifle?
Yeah. So funny story. I actually started archery hunting. Well, I had a bow since I was a kid. I think for my 12-year-old birthday, my parents bought me an old Browning compound, and I didn't have any sights on it. I would just, shoot it in the backyard. The reason that I kind of wanted a bow is because my dad wouldn't let me, respectively so, he wouldn't let me shoot the guns without him being there. When I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, obviously for obvious reasons, he didn't want an accident happen at home. And so I got a bow because I could shoot a bow without having to ask for permission at home. So then I started shooting a bow for a long time. Then I was out 16, 17, 18. I was like, man, I'm going to hunt big game with my bow. And I got a compound. I think I borrowed one from an uncle because couldn't afford a bow at the time, and started chasing deer, and I had no idea what I was doing, right? I climbed a tree one day because I'm like, oh, I see these people on TV climbing tree stands. That's how I need to kill mule deer is to try to, shoot out of the tree. And long story short, I fell out of the tree and almost got really hurt. Didn't know what I was doing. And, I kind of got busy with college and business and a few other things. I didn't bow hunt for a few years until I picked it up until I was about 25. And to be honest, the reason I picked it up is because there was more opportunity for tags. I wanted to be hunting, because bow hunting's hard, right? Especially out west, it's super hard.
Absolutely.
And there was more availability because it wasn't as popular back then, right? There wasn't Total Archery Challenge and mountain archery festivals where everyone was shooting a bow, and there wasn't social media back then, so there was just so much opportunity. Well, there's not as much opportunity now, but then I fell in love with bow hunting. So that was the big reason I got into it then. And now rifle hunting, I've got into long range hunting and custom rifles and whatnot. So, I mean, the answer is I love them both. I get tags. It just depends on where I can get tags. A lot of years I'll do 60% bow hunting and 40% rifle. And depending on what tags I draw, it'll be swapped, 60% rifle and 40% bow. And, we hear a lot of guys online and comments on our YouTube videos. Oh man, you shot that buck from 600 yards. It's probably because good thing you don't bow hunt because you probably can't get closer. Actually, we get really close with bows too, and we love bow hunting just as much. So, just depends on the opportunity in the year, and what we can draw and what we can get over the counter and so on and so forth. We love them both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what? My answer is going to be very, very similar. So I absolutely love bow hunting. I did start shooting a bow probably before I even started shooting a gun. I targeted muleys with a bow before I started with a gun, and I absolutely love just that element of having to get close, having to, find one, and then to really look at the terrain and figure out, okay, how can I get close to this animal? And, especially developing when to wait and when to go after them. I really enjoy the whole sitting around and waiting and calculating my next move. That's super, and it does come into play with both of them, obviously. But then on the other hand, there's just something about ranging out at 450, 500 and being able to touch one off and get one that way as well. So both of them are awesome. Just as long as you're out there hunting, that's all that really matters.
Right. That's all that really matters. And a lot of people say rifle hunting's easy. And I'm just I beg to differ. rifle hunting, at least out west, isn't easy, because bow hunting might be easier early on because at least you're seeing deer, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the time the rifle season rolls around, we've gone through archery, muzzleloader, and these bucks are educated. They're in the thick timber. There's still leaves on the trees a lot of times. Yeah, you got a gun, but then you can't find it. But when you do find one, yeah, I mean, it's a little easier than getting close to 13 yards and trying to stick one with a bow. You can shoot one from 3, 4, 5, 600 yards, and that becomes a little bit easier. But there's still an element of challenge, right? Rifle hunting's still tough.
Mm-hmm. 100%. So what can you walk us through your rifle setup? What do you like to use for mule deer?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a little bit of a snob, like I said, with custom rifles, and I like trying different calibers too. And I think you guys carry actually a wide variety of custom rifles. I think you guys carry a Christensen Arms.
Yeah.
Now I think you even have some proof rifles too. Now that you guys carry some different proof rifles I've seen in the stores.
I believe so. So
Yeah.
we've got basically just about any caliber rifle, and if we don't have it on hand, we can work on a special order for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. To that point, I shoot a proof rifle. A lot of times I'll shoot a custom rifle too, with a proof barrel that has a Macmillan stock. I try to run a titanium action too, because a lot of times I'm hunting high country, backpack hunting, so I like to have the lightest rifle setup possible. But I'll shoot anything from a 6.5 PRC all the way up to a 300 Norma for mule deer. One of my favorite backpacking setup was a 300 Wisdom. That had a proof barrel on as well. That was just a solid setup. I'll be shooting a 300 PRC this year just because I can, I guess. I just wanted to try a 300 PRC all year. In fact, I took a few bears this spring with a 300 PRC. So, I like to be in that 22 to 26 inch barrel range lengthwise, because I like to put it on a backpack. I'll try to go with like a 22 inch barrel, especially if I'm going to screw a suppressor on. One challenge you'll see with getting a longer barrel is you'll be ducking under timber, and if you have it on your pack, that barrel will snag on stuff. So you're going to want to be cognizant of that when you're buying or building a rifle. But I think all around, a 6.5 PRC on mule deer is just money. You use that Hornady ELDX bullet or that ELDM bullet. X is for hunting, M's for match, but they both work great. They don't advertise the M for hunting, but that's a phenomenal bullet too. It's just got a little bit thinner jacket than the X. But man, that's a hard one to beat. It's kind of like, I know the Creedmoor. I know some people tease about the need more quote, but the PRC is the Creedmoor on roids, and you can get a little bit bigger bullet out of it and a little more velocity, which results into more energy downrange. But I don't know, man. The 7 mag's good. I know people are going to write in and be like, why didn't he talk about the 270 and 30-06? Those are both phenomenal rounds as well. A lot of good options for guns and mule deer hunting and calibers. But I try to get that mid-weight on a rifle. I try to make sure your glass is almost your most important thing. You've got to have good glass, especially if you're hunting the high country where shots tend to be a little bit longer. And then I like to have something around 8-9 pounds, so that way that when I get behind the gun, I can anchor. I can settle those crosshairs. With lighter builds, 8 and under, 7 and under, 6 and under, it can be harder to shoot longer distances because you're just not quite as steady. So
Yep, that makes perfect sense. You got to kind of find that fine line between having something that's heavy enough so you're super stable in the moment of truth, versus having something that's a little bit too heavy and then you're carrying 15, 20 pounds on your back for 15, 20 miles, and that'll wear you out in a hurry.
Yeah, that'll wear you out. And, if you're hunting steep stuff, that'll make you off balance a little bit too. So you got to make sure it's in your pack good so it doesn't kick you down a mountain and or you don't lose your footing. But yeah, I like to be around that 10 to 11.5 mark for any of my backpack hunting. And some people might say that's a little heavy, but confidence kills, and I'm confident in those setups right there. So.
Yeah, that's the name of the game, is confidence. Just to, get something that you feel super comfortable with, and you can repeat performance and get out there and get after it.
Yeah, and someone might be super confident at 6 pounds, and they just know that I'm never going to shoot over 350 yards, and that's okay too. You know, if that's what works for you, then that's what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, people shoot mule deer with a recurve. If you can get within 20 yards, like you can get within 350.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of good things there. A lot of good options.
Mm-hmm. So, question for you. If you've got 2 bucks out in front of you, both big, mature, one of them super tall, one of them super wide, which one are you shooting?
You didn't talk about mass, man. Which ones? Have they got the similar mass or what?
Let's say similar. That's not a factor.
We're going wide.
Going wide. And why is that?
Just because, you know, like I don't know how it is with whitetail hunting, but like a 30-inch wide buck is like a club. There's like a 200-inch club with mule deer,
Mm-hmm.
and there's the 30-inch wide club. And I've now shot 2 bucks over 30, and it took me 20 years to do that, you know? So, and not quite 20, I guess I'm not that old, but it's just hard to come by. You know, a 30-inch buck is a 30-inch buck. It's something that our grandpas, our dads always talked about. A 30-inch wide buck that's next level.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And you know what? My answer is exactly the same too. You know, it brings me back to like the first year I went out mule deer hunting, and I got to this area, you know, I was a little bit later in the morning because it was like the second spot I'd went to, and I caught this group of bucks, this bachelor group transitioning, and I see the first one come out, and he's tall, super tall, and I'm like, oh, that's a great buck. And then two more behind him were like, okay, a little bit smaller, but like I still would have shot him. And then the last one comes, and he looks pretty good, nothing super special, like still fairly tall. And they were walking across this clearing, and then all of a sudden I see the back one turn sideways, and it's like all of 30 wide, and my eyes just got like saucers. I'm like, holy smokes, that's the one I want. You know, it's just, it's something about that super wide, just that frame. So cool to see. And I came so close to shooting that deer too, because like I watched him go across this clearing, get into a draw area, and then it's like, okay, now I can make my move. Scanning the area, it's like I can drop straight down, and there's some brush in front of me, so I can get to where it's low, and I can follow that lowland. And I marked like, okay, that group of trees, they're right next to it. So I get up, I get to the edge of it, I get my binoculars up, and I'm like, they got to be within a couple 100 yards here. So I'm looking, and then I see like the tops of tines. Okay, there's one of them. There's 2. There's my wide guy. He's in a spot. Mm-hmm. He's like bedded, looking away. Wind is right. This is go time now. Okay, I got about probably 75 yards to cover before I can get to a shot where I feel super comfortable. And they're like, there's this draw, and then it goes out, and then there's like this tree row where the draw is at. And so I'm like, okay, if I stay at this elevation in the hill, like all these deer are going to be behind the canopy of these trees, so I can get into range this way. So I'm crawling through, I'm making sure like they're in the right zone, and I could see 3 of the 4. So I'm like, okay, well, hopefully that 4th one is in that same spot. And it turns out he wasn't. He was below. So as soon as I got to basically my effective range, that one buck was like, yep, I see you, buddy. This is not going to happen. So just one buck messed the whole thing up.
Yeah, and it seems like there's always this sentinel buck with mule deer. It's like this because they're in bachelor groups in the summer, right? So they're hanging out with all their buddies because they're not into the ladies yet. And it seems like there's always this super, super smart buck that just has this uncanny ability to pick out things that aren't right. And for me, I hunted this 200-inch buck for 2 years, called him Old Red, and he'd hang out with this permanent 2-point, the 2-point that would never grow any bigger. Maybe this 2-point was like 10 years old, but this 2-point screwed me up so many times. It made me so mad. It made me just I'm like, I gotta kill this 2-point. Why don't I just put my tag on this 2-point? I'm sure he'll taste great, because if I don't kill this 2-point, I'm never going to kill this 200-inch buck. So I don't know, man. It's that early season stuff. You just remind me of that story because you got picked out by one of the other bachelor bucks.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? It happens. I mean, like you can't go into mule deer hunting expecting a successful stock every time. Like,
No way.
I don't care how good you are, how many times you've done it, like how confident you feel in this situation. Like, there's just always factors that like are out of your control. Like whether it's the wind will swirl, or like cloud cover will change in a spot that he was feeling comfortable in the shade. Now he's got to move, like there's always something that can't be accounted for. But
so
when it all
many
goes
factors.
together, it's magical, man.
It is magical. Like the coyote that bumps into you that you had no idea was there, or the doe that you literally almost stepped on that blew the other deer out. Like, there's so many factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
or the helicopter flies over and busts them all out, or airplane, or whatever it might be. It's crazy.
Yep, that's just hunting for you. So let's talk about some tips. Let's do some stalking tips. What's some advice you have for people out there that want to get into mule deer hunting but haven't really tried the whole spot and stalk thing?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to think about would be it's a numbers game, right? Get on this. If you're just barely hunting mule deer with a bow for the first time, it's a numbers game. Get on as many stalks as you can. So the most successful mule deer hunters there are out there with a bow say that about 1 in every 10 stalks is successful. So if you're a novice bow hunter hunting mule deer, think of how many more it's going to take you. So I think for stalking, make sure you're getting on plenty of stalks. Number 2, obviously make sure you're getting the wind right? The wind is everything. These mule deer have noses like you wouldn't believe, a lot like other animals, I'm sure. And then they have these sonar-like ears, these giant ears that can pick up movement like you wouldn't believe. So making sure that you're ultra quiet, you can't get away with anything. So make sure your setup that's on your chest rig, whether it's your bino harness or your pack or your bow, there's no clinking, ticking, arrows hitting rest or arrows falling off rest and tinking your aluminum bow. Whatever it is, you have to make sure you are whisper quiet, because if not, he's going to hear you and you're going to blow him out. So making sure your setup is dialed, and back to that word we just talked about, confidence. Making sure you're ultra confident in your ability to make a stalk, get your gear that you need, your rangefinder, your release, and everything on there, and come to full draw without making a bunch of ruckus. That's going to be the biggest thing, because what you could get away hunting other big game, you can't get away with hunting mule deer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that first tip you gave on, like just getting out there and stalking animals, I agree with you 100%. The first time I went out mule deer hunting, like the first buck or the first group that we saw, like they probably weren't ones that we wanted to hunt, but It's like, oh, this is a perfect practice situation. It was kind of that like midday time where you don't see a ton of animals running all over the place. So it's like, okay, like if we burn an hour here, like maybe it's not helping us directly tag one right now, but it's going to help us be ready for future stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a great tip. Just get out and try it. And you get up there, you do a successful stalk, and you get to like the point where you could actually like pull back and be, okay, I could have tagged this one. That's just a huge boost for your confidence factor too. It's like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just remind me of something there where you kind of telling that story there. You can't take risks. Don't risk the win. Don't do it. You're not going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get across an opening where you've got to get to another bush, I wouldn't take that risk. You've spent 3 hours getting as far as you have. Don't take that risk at 20 yards trying to get to that next bush where you've got no cover, because all it takes is one to put his head up and look towards you and the whole thing's gone. Sure, it seems like the second you pick up, like one just happens to lift its head up. So your risk taking has to be nil.
That's definitely one thing you have to learn when mule deer hunting is like when you need to be patient versus when you need to make that move.
Yeah.
Because like
that's the hardest part.
So many, I mean, that's gotta be the reason for probably a majority of blown stocks is like, just make sure to take your time and know that what you're doing, it isn't going to booger them out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Have you ever been in that situation where you've been like, man, I got to get to that bush right now. If I can get to that bush right now, I'm going to kill this deer. And you either didn't listen to your gut and the deer walked by and you totally would have smoked one, or, you didn't think inside your head that you could get there undetected. And if you had the confidence to get there, you would have killed that buck. Has that ever happened to you? Because that's happened to me. Like, I got to get to that bush right now.
Oh yeah, 100%. It happened a couple of years ago. Actually, it was a really nice buck. It was a tall one, wasn't the wide one, but he was still like one look at him. Yep, this is the one I want to go after. I know I was coming around the edge of this draw, and then all of a sudden I see him on the other side, and it's like, okay, well, I'm in a good position to just observe right now. And I got to see what this buck does. And I look at the terrain around me. It's like, so there's a big tree that's covering a lot of stuff, and then there's a smaller bush to the side of it. And I just look at that and it's like, okay, well, where I'm at right now, if I can actually go back, then I can get that big tree in between the two of us. And then I can go down and across and I can get to that bush. And once I get to that bush, then that's where I'm going to be in the chips. So I'm like looking over this situation in my head, and I'm just getting ready to move. And then all of a sudden there's another deer that comes from the other side of the draw walking through. And I was literally like just about to pack up my stuff and get going after this buck. And that one comes through and I'm like, oh, if that one would have came like 15 seconds later, the whole gig would have been up.
Oh man.
So yeah, just definitely like before you make that move, like double check, triple check your surroundings, because a lot of times it's not your target buck that's going to catch you. It's going to be something else around your surroundings.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You know what I think is underutilized in tight quarter situation is your binoculars.
Mm-hmm.
Pull out your binos and be looking under each piece of sagebrush to make sure there's not an alternate buck bedded that you didn't previously know about, or that you're not seeing antler tips and they're closer than you thought. I think that's one thing that you reminded me. So that story you just told, I was imagining you and a coolie sneaking through, trying to get to a buck, and you had brush all around you. And you just got me thinking, man, I'd be scanning all that brush to make sure that there wasn't one bedded that you didn't know about,
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And the other thing you reminded me of was never count your chickens before they hatch. Because how many stocks have you ever been on and you're like, this is done. This is so easy and so perfect that I got this. And then it seems like every time I thought this, like I have this buck, oh, this thing's screwed. He's in trouble. And it doesn't work out. You're like, how did that not work out?
Yeah.
Like, because I already imagined it was over. I imagined how I was going to cape him out and what kind of turn I was going to have.
What pose he's going to have on the wall.
Yeah. What pose he's going to have. What taxidermist am I going to use for this one? It just humbles you, man. You got to be on your game all the time. You just can't count your chickens before they hatch, and you can't think it's over. Because at the end of the day, they live in the wild. They're looking for predators all the time.
Yep, 100%. A lot of times with that issue, it's like I'll start on my stock, and then once you actually get down into the thick of things, it's like, wow, this is a whole different world. This is way different than what I imagined it would be.
100%.
Yep, and that's where like I've found that finding a reference point on your animal is like crucial. Like the buck I killed with my rifle a few years back. I ranged him and he was at 780, and that's like, okay, that's not something I'm comfortable with. I want to get closer. And so it's like, okay, I got to cover some ground, and I get kind of down to try and get closer. And then it's way different than what I anticipated. Like you can see what's in front of you on that like first rise, but if he's like one or two hills over, it's like you can get over that first rise and then it's like a completely different world out there. But if you have a good reference point, like the tallest tree next to it, like I'll range the tallest tree close to him and then I'll range the animal, and it's like, okay, he's 75 yards away from that tree. So then I know, like, okay, I want to keep the top of that tree visible at all times, or at least know where it's at for sure. Then if I happen to not see that animal, I can still get a good idea of where he's at.
100%. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a awesome tip right there. Especially when you're going into country that you've never stalked before or area you've never hunted. If you can point out those reference points and okay, there's a big kind of burnt tree right here. He's just beyond that, as opposed to not paying attention to that burnt tree and getting over there and be like, okay, was it this tree, that tree, or that tree? I don't remember it. And then you're just being lazy and casual and looking around, and all of a sudden you're going to get busted, right? Two, I would say there's a new feature that is super, super cool. And if you use a map, which most of us do, right, especially a digital app, Basemap actually has this new feature called an XDR line, which is exact direction and range. And you hit the middle button, and it projects this scale with distances. So that way, if you're like, okay, that buck bedded right there, you can literally point your phone in a compass and scale will come out, and you can see how far you are from the bedded buck without having to range it. Or you could see that clump of trees and you could range from there, and then you'll know, okay, if I get to that clump of trees, he's bedded just beyond that. I should be within 20 yards if I can get to that clump of trees.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And that brings up a point, like when you're trying to stalk something, it may be a lot farther than you really think. Like, so you range it and it's 800 yards. You gotta take into account that you're likely going down since you spotted an animal from a higher point, and then you're going back up, back down, whatever. So like you could be traveling 1,500 yards to get to that 800 yards where the animal is at too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of tools to be able to help us, but the ultimate tool is right between your ears, and that's getting reference points. I think that's one thing you got to do, regardless of what technology you have or using, or tools, or the skills that you have as a bow hunter. I think that's the big thing, is just making mental notes. And a lot of times, just making that mental note's huge.
Mm-hmm. So how aggressive are you willing to be based off of wind direction? Like obviously you have to have the wind in your favor when you're doing this stuff, but at what sort of crosswind are you comfortable to like go after an animal?
Yeah. So it's going to depend a lot on conditions. Wind. So if you have a little bit of wind, it's a double-edged sword. It's going to mask some of your noise, which is a good thing for mule deer, right? So that means you're going to be able to approach your stalk more aggressively. You're going to be able to go quicker and harder. So it's good for that, but it's also bad because if there is enough wind and it shifts, you're in trouble, right? The buck's going to smell you. So, and then if it's dry, especially out west, let's say like this year, those leaves and brush is going to be so, balsam root is another big fat leaf thing that grows up here. That's going to be like stepping on firecrackers. It's going to be so loud. So again, it's going to depend on conditions and how much drought we've had. Now, if it's dry, I don't go very fast at all. I would rather miss the opportunity and go slow and have them beat me to a transition point than blow them out, because I'll know I'll have another opportunity if I can get there quicker the next day or the evening. But you can get away with a lot of things with a nasty wind, because that's why the mule deer don't like the wind, because I just think it muffles up all their senses. It's if you've got a good wind, it's a good opportunity to go in there and kill one. But one of the other challenges with the wind is too, you've got to get really close, because you're going to have, unless you know how your arrow shoots in extreme wind, which most of us don't practice for extreme wind, you're going to have a hard time hitting that animal, and you don't want to hit another animal, and you don't want to hit him bad, because we all know what happens when you don't hit one bad with a bow. It's just like, oh man, it's a gut wrencher. It's something I hope everyone's going to experience at some point, Knock on wood. Hopefully it isn't us anytime soon, but it happens. So.
Yeah, sooner or later, it's going to happen. It's the nature of the beast with that one. And you are right on with the whole wind and the level of wind too, because it's like the more wind you have, the more you're going to get away with, but the lower your effective range is going to be. Because like you can be out at the range and you can hit that pie plate 10 out of 10 times at 100 yards. You can be feeling great. And then you get out there into a situation where the wind is blowing and you're holding that full draw. Like it's not easy to keep that pin on that animal. And you gotta keep in mind ethics at that point.
Right. And even I'm picturing you in the Badlands, right? Coming up over top on some ag, going to shoot down into a coulee. I mean, just trying to get your bubble level and a little bit of wind. That's frustrating as can be, and that's even hard to do. Is get that bubble level when shooting down. You got some wind.
For sure. So, all right, I'm curious about some story time here. Do you have a favorite mule deer hunting story for us?
Oh man, I got a good one. So back to that Mule Deer Country series. I'll tell a shorter version of it. So Tyler and I are on day 13 of this mule deer hunt, right? I think, yeah, I had a stint in between this time that we headed back to the high country, and we were due for some weather. So I hike up to 11,000 feet or so, or whatever it was. I set up my tent, my bivouac, and get all my gear together, and I go to sleep that night. Well, I wake up literally to the tent frozen to the top of my forehead because it had snowed and piled up all this snow on my Hilleberg, and I literally had to peel it off the top of my forehead. I'm like, oh my gosh! And I went to put my feet in my boots. My boots were frozen from the sweat from the day before, so I couldn't even get my feet in my boots. I'm like, oh my gosh! This is horrible. So then I zip open the tent, and I look out there, and this is September. And I look out there, and there's a foot of snow. And it's like 25 blowing white out. I'm like, oh my gosh. I've waited this long to draw this tag, and a part of me wanted to quit. A part of me wanted to give up and be like, you're stupid. You're the only one in here. You're the only one dumb enough to come in here. You're up here solo. You're trying to film this by yourself. Like, what are you doing here? And I was having this mental battle, like, oh, I should be home. I should be with my family, my kids. I'm just wasting my time up here. And I was like, no, I pushed through it. I'm like, I'm not going to quit. I don't give up. I pushed through, had the mental fortitude. I'm like, okay, I've got to make this more bearable for me. What can I do to try to alleviate this situation? So I fire up my jet boil, right? And I just got it going full bore. And I got a full thing of gas. And so I'm just trying to pour on pine needles, trying to do everything I could do to start a fire. It was pouring the night before, and then it came in and rained on top of that and froze. I had that thing in, and I couldn't light anything on fire. I had that thing going full bore. I couldn't find sticks. Everything was too wet, and I'm like, I gotta get out of here. I'm gonna freeze to death up here. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to lose 2,000 feet of elevation so that I can start a fire, but I'm like, oh, screw it. I've got to go, or I'm not gonna make it. So I did down 2,000 feet in elevation. I'm like, that sucks. I gotta climb back up here. Well, I'm just like, I got to try to get a fire started. In fact, when I was headed up there, I ran into a park ranger that's like, hey, it's supposed to storm, and I wouldn't go in here if I were you. And he was on horseback. I'm like, no, it doesn't look like it's going to storm. And I got to fill my tag, right? It took me 5 years to draw this tag. And so anyway, I get down there, and I finally get a fire started. My spirits start to lift, right? I knew that Tyler was coming in. He was going to meet me with horses. Little sucker. I had to sweat it out that night. He gets to come in on horses, doesn't have to hike in, and doesn't have to freeze. Man, I was mad. and anyway, so I finally got this fire started. It took me 2-3 hours, and I got some of my gear dried out, and some of the clouds started to leave. And man, I can do hard things. I got it out here. Now I'm the only guy on the mountain because it's just such horrible weather. I set myself up for an absolutely fantastic opportunity in the wilderness, And so anyway, I dry my stuff out and I start heading back in there, and I get to the top of this boulder. It's just whipping. It was almost unbearable to be up there with the way that I'm sure you've been cut by the wind before. Mm-hmm. It goes right through all your layers. You're trying to glass and your eyes are so watery, and then I'm thinking, oh man, I'm just wasting my time again. So I'm like, no, there's one more day, Eric. Just hack it. You can do it. Tyler will be up here. So Tyler eventually gets up there and we get into the bull and we're glassing and there's just no deer. It goes back to the hardhorn stuff, right? We can't find deer. The deer that we'd scouted early in the season were ghosts. And there was a lot of timber around. I'm like, well, they've got to be here. Like, maybe all the hunters shot them when we weren't here. All these things going through your mind on public land where, the biggest battle you have is 6 inches between your ears, right? You're trying to quit. Everything's telling you to get up and quit. And I'm like, no, okay, let's hike around this base, and it's 6 inches of snow, and there was drifts, and it was just tough going. And we eventually warmed up because we got hiking a little bit, got our stuff drying. I actually got a little bit of sliver of cell service. I'm like, Tyler, bring me a lighter, bring me a fire starter, bring me new socks, bring me food, because I was just so miserable, right?
Yeah, everything you need to recharge.
Yeah, everything I needed to recharge, but I had this mental boost because I knew that Tyler was coming in. I knew I survived the worst of it. It was kind of letting up. I got my stuff dried out, so my spirits were good, So as we're going around this basin, I'm like, I look back at Ty, and he's a little bit behind me, and I'm like, what's he doing? He's glassing down there. And he brought a friend to help with horses, and he glassed down there, and he found a buck. He's like, well, there's a buck down here. I'm like, well, how big is it? And he's like, I don't know. I'm going to kill it. I'm like, okay, sounds good. So here I'm thinking, I'm like, Tyler comes in here. I'm the one that had to sweat it out here in this awful storm. I had to sleep up here by myself, freeze. And Tyler comes in here and spots a buck, and he's going to kill it. And I'm like, oh, man. So then I was moping, right? I had kind of a little bit of a bad attitude. I'm like, come on, man. Pick your head up. Tyler's going to go kill that buck. You got to go find one for yourself. So I whip around the basin, and I bump out a buck. He goes running across. And I get up to range him. And it was so cold that I couldn't feel my hands. And I went to range this buck heading across the basin. My rangefinder dropped. So there's a 4-point, the last day of the season, probably 160-inch buck. I go to range him, and he's probably, I don't know, 400 to 700 yards. I couldn't tell because of the snow and the lighting and everything else was going on. My brain was foggy, and he was running. It was just I dropped my rangefinder in snow, and I can't find it.
Oh.
I'm like, you're kidding me. So I'm like, then all of a sudden when I'm looking for this rangefinder here, boom, boom. I'm like, oh, well, Tyler just killed a deer. Here, I got a deer here I can't kill because I can't find my rangefinder. And I just wasn't going to start launching rounds at it, I felt like that would be irresponsible. So hour later, I finally find my rangefinder in the snow. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This just isn't my day. I'm like, I'm just starting to get depressed and beat myself up a little bit. I'm like, no, don't give up. Keep going. Earn it. And those are the things that kept going through my mind. Don't give up. Keep going. Earn it. So anyway, I'm like, well, Tyler killed a buck. I'll hike across these cliffs and go back to the other basin and see what I can see. I haven't checked out that spot for a long time. And I'd scouted it earlier in the season. So we have rifles at this point, right? This is a rifle hunt at this point. And so anyway, we go over to that other basin. And I sit down there, take my pack off, and I look down in the snow. I look down in the snow. There's 2 bucks with a monster buck. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. 180 yards. So I went to set up the camera to film it. And I'm like, screw it, it's the last day of the season. I can't mess this up. Buck, they kind of spook. He goes up. And I see just a big old cheater on the edge of it. Anyone that mule deer hunts knows you get a buck with a cheater, it's special. It's just
absolutely
special. So this buck runs up, boom, smoking. I'm like, oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. And I was all by myself. I didn't know where Tyler was. I finally was able to send off a text to Tyler. I'm like, hey, got a buck down. He's like, are you kidding me? Because he killed his in a hellhole, right down the very bottom. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up killing mine in a hellhole. I'm like, dude, you gotta get him help. So I told him where to meet me, told him how to find me, sent him a marker. He meets up with me, and I get up to this buck, and I'm just like, I can't believe it. I was thinking like 170, 175, and now I'm up to this buck. I'm like 190, 195 on the last day of the season when so many times I wanted to give up. And Tyler could only see I was kind of like trying to position the deer, take photos, and he walked up, the deer's antlers were in the bushes. He walks up to the buck, and he could just see the big fork. He's like, oh, you shot a 2-point. I'm like, what?
No, it's got a couple more than that.
Yeah, I pulled up the whole rack out of the snowy brush. He's like, "Oh my gosh, dude, that thing's a giant." I said, "Let me see the one you killed." And he shows me the one he killed. And this thing is the buck you talked about, the tall. If you shoot a wider, taller, he shot this tall buck that was just pop can, just giant. We joked about it, that it had a body size as big as a spike elk. So here we are on the last day of the seasons. We killed 2 slammer bucks on public land on a day that we had no business hunting, and we pulled it off. That was probably one of the most incredible stories of mule deer hunting. I wanted to tell that story because we almost gave up.
Mm-hmm.
We almost quit, and we didn't, and we grinded out, and we killed 2 of the most incredible mule deer bucks I've ever seen. So
that's really awesome. That's a good story. It actually reminds me of my first mule deer buck too, because it was like inclement weather like that. Because we'd found this buck, and it was like the sun was coming down, and he was in range. I think we got to like 475 something. It was like on the long end of what I feel comfortable shooting, but I feel okay. And he was with a group of other deer, and they dropped down into this like kind of brushy area. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, they're going to filter through a little bit sooner or later, and I'm going to be prone over my pack. I'm going to be ready to go. I've already ranged it. I've already dialed to where I want to. And probably a half an hour later, this buck comes out, and I'm getting ready to touch off, and something's like, something just doesn't feel right. Let me take a breath, look at it again, and I look again, and I'm like, that is not the buck that I wanted to shoot. It just can't be. And it turns out it wasn't. So thankfully I didn't touch off on that one. But then it got dark on us. So it's like, okay, they got to be in that vicinity the next morning. We'll just, we'll head back to that spot, and as soon as the sun's rising, we'll be there glass and hopefully find them again. So I wake up in the morning, and there's 10 inches of snow, and it's blowing like crazy. And there was no snow before. And so I'm like, okay, this is absolutely miserable conditions, But what I have on my side is I'm in public land, and no one else is going to go back there when it snowed 10 inches and it's currently a snowstorm. You'd have to be crazy to do that.
Yeah.
Or you'd had to have found the buck that you wanted to shoot, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to get after him, which I was scenario number 2. And so we get to that spot, and it's just blowing like crazy in our face. You can hardly see through binoculars. And I'm like, well, based off of all my years of hunting, that deer is going to be in the thickest, nastiest stuff that I'm going to find. He's going to want to get out of this. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to go after him. So there was 3 really good draws in that area where I'd seen him the night before. So I go down, I go to the first one, and the wind isn't great for it. It's kind of like a crosswind. So I start at the bottom on the first one, and I'm thinking like, okay, I'll go up through, like the wind should be pushing off of this draw, and I should be okay. So I get like a quarter of the way through, and then I see deer bumping out on top. I'm like, okay, well, that is not the right way to do it. There was no way I would have an opportunity at this deer. I need to get the elevation in my favor a little bit and still be good enough with the wind where I shouldn't get busted. So I'm like, okay, the next draw, I'm going to get to like the halfway point and glass a bunch and then kind of work my way through it. So I do that, and I glass and I don't see anything. And I get like 2 steps in to the thicker stuff, and all of a sudden a deer comes out on the bottom, and it's the buck that I was after. I was like, no. Come on, I just can't win on this. I feel like I got to go higher to get the elevation in my favor, and then I screw it up where if I would have done the first one, I'd have probably got to look at him. And I watched this buck go through the bottom, around the next rise, just majestic, trotting through like, there's my hopes and dreams trotting away right now. And I sit there and I contemplate what's going on. I go out to my pack and I grab a sandwich, and I'm just sitting in my sorrow there. And I'm like, the wind is not good for going after this deer, but he's the only tracks. Like, I know where that deer went. I can get on his tracks. I can follow. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to follow him. He went at least a half of a mile. So I get around and I get to that next hill where I saw him gone. And then I feel the wind, and it's like, okay, it's more of a crosswind over here. I think I'm going to be okay. So I get down, and I get down into this nasty stuff, and I'm going super, super slow because, like, I got the whole day. I got nothing but time. The only issue I have is, like, it's still snowing and the tracks start to go away a little bit. So I have to kind of at least be able to stay on these tracks. And I see these tracks go to the right and then go to the left. And it's like, oh, okay, he's going to find a place to bed now. So I'm just like old school tracking, finding this deer.
Yeah,
and
cool.
as soon as I saw, like, okay, he went left, and I start going left, and he pops up, and he didn't know what was going on. Like, it's super windy. The wind was still good enough. And he goes and he bumps, and then but while he's bumping, like, I still have my scope covers on because, like, I don't want to get all snowed up and whatnot. So I'm fumbling with my scope covers, like, I gotta get a shot at this thing. And he stops at like 150 to 180. So it's like, I gotta freehand this, but he's standing broadside. Like, I still feel confident with this shot, and I shoot and I hit him just a hair back. You know, it's like I saw him buckle, I saw him get ready to go down. So I'm like, okay, he's hit good. He's gonna bed right away. He goes over this hill, and, like, at that point, it's snowing more, you know, like, so I'm at kind of I kind of have to go after this deer because, like, I'm on a blood trail now. So, like, I know where he's going. I can see the tracks, but they're gonna go away soon. So I'm going after this deer, and I get over the rise, and then there he is, and we lock eyes immediately, and then he's like, takes off again. I'm like, wow, did I didn't quite know if that was the right decision or the wrong decision, but I end up just keeping following this thing, and he ended up doubling back all the way to where he was initially bedded, and I ended up getting him there. So it was wild. It's just the things you run into.
Yeah, the things you run into. That was pretty cool how you deployed the old school tracking, use the snow to your advantage. That was a good play there.
Mm-hmm. You have to kind of throw out all the loops and just go for it at some point, you know.
Yeah, a lot of people say that whitetail hunting is a game of chess, but I think mule deer hunting is like the game of strategy. Like, it just depends on the weather. It depends on, the conditions. There's so many depends on the time of the year. There's so many factors that go into a successful mule deer hunt. And I think both of our stories just kind of showed that, how they were, not giving up, and then you use tracking. And then how big was that buck?
Oh, he's probably around that 170 mark, I would say. So, I mean, for my first mule deer, like, I'm taking that for sure. He didn't have a ton of mass, but he had a great frame. So, and, like, yeah, it was one of those bucks where, like, because I had passed up a lot of muleys before I went after that one. It was like, nice deer. Some of them are mature with not great headgear, but, like, stuff a lot of people would shoot. But I was like, I waited 7 years for this tag, and my wife had actually filled that tag when she got drawn. She shot a really, really nice mule deer, and that was my starting point. Like, I can't let my wife have a bigger buck on the wall than me, so I got it. Like, I can't go after it unless I know without a doubt is bigger than that one. So, and that was the first one that I saw was, yep, he's bigger. I'm going after him.
It feels good to, pass on bucks and finally take the one you want.
Yeah. Oh, it really does. It's super rewarding. Like, when you get to that stage in hunting where it's like, okay, I'm gonna target mature deer now. I'm gonna set myself a goal, and if it's not at that, I'm not gonna let excitement get the best of me, and I'm gonna really go for what I set my sights for initially. It's a pretty cool feeling, and then, it's something you start learning a lot more too. It's like to kill a deer is one thing, but to kill a mature deer is almost a totally different game.
100%. 100% time and dedication and the skill level takes. Yeah, you can get lucky. You can get lucky. But the time
you can get lucky, and so many people do. But yeah,
and the sacrifice it takes, and that's why when you see guys consistently do it year after year, bow, rifle, whatever, that goes off to them. It's impressive.
Yep, 100%. Well, That's awesome. You've told some great stories, left some good tidbits. So you have one takeaway for us for if somebody's going to go out and wants a mule deer hunt this year?
Well, the one takeaway?
Yep.
Oh man, start accumulating points, because it almost just doesn't happen anymore. Tags are getting harder and harder to come by. So, but I would say if the one takeaway when you finally get that tag is the amount of work that you're going to have to put in, and work in all sorts of facets in the sense of research, e-scouting, and then actually scouting, boots on the ground, and then getting it done. Don't think it's going to be easy. There can be easy ones and there can be lucky ones, but plan on working your guts out. That's what I love about it. And it's like you said, the harder you work, the more rewarding it is. So plan on putting in work, and know that if you are lucky enough to tag out, that it's going to be special.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Be willing to work hard, and sit back and just enjoy it too.
Absolutely.
You won't be able to do this forever, but your memories will last forever.
Absolutely, man. 100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. For people who want to continue following along with you, how do they stay connected?
Yeah, reach out to us on Instagram. Follow us there, Muley_Freak. We also have a YouTube channel where we post a lot of videos. Subscribe to us there. You can also follow me personally, Muley Freak _Erik with a K, ERIK, and check us out there. So it was an honor, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then you do have like an apparel line and bino harness. If you're near the Sandy, Utah SCHEELS, they have them in store, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, we're there in Sandy, and also check us out online. So either works great for us. We love supporting our dealers as well. So.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Erik, time and wisdom, and best of luck this upcoming season.
Hey, you too, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You just heard our conversation with Erik Van Woerkom of Muley Freak on mule deer hunting tips, tactics, and strategies. Now, if this is something you want to get into but need equipment, make sure to head to your local SCHEELS or visit scheels.com. We'll have everything you need to get ready for the upcoming season, and experts that'll help you every step of the way, fit you into exactly what you need for your specific situation. If you like what you heard today, please give us a follow on the listening platform you chose. And with that, we want to thank you all for listening, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the SCHEELS Outdoors podcast. Stay tuned for future segments and visit our social media pages, SCHEELS Outdoors on Facebook and Instagram, for daily updates.